So here we are going to go over the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And this is a hormonal system because it utilizes angiotensin and aldosterone, which are two distinct hormones. This system is often referred to as RAAS, as the short form. Now, before we get into it, we need to understand two distinct terms, and that's hypotension and hypertension. Hypotension simply meaning low blood pressure, because remember, hypo means low, and then hypertension, hyper means high, so high blood pressure. Now, over here, it's important to understand the structure of the nephron because it's critical in our understanding of RAAS. So to briefly go over the nephron, over here we have the Bowman's capsule, and we have the glomerulus, and together these two structures make the renal corpuscle. Now remember, the glomerulus is essentially just a bundle of capillaries that nest in between over here within this structure called the Bowman's capsule. Now, ions and small molecules will seep through these capillaries and enter the Bowman's capsule and become what we call filtrate. And that filtrate will move through the nephron and go through a series of absorptions and secretions until it eventually reaches the collecting duct and goes on to become urine. Now, the nephron has a series of locations within it which can detect either blood pressure or sodium levels. And that brings us to our question of when is renin released? This essentially means when is our renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system going to occur, and why is it going to occur? Well, the system is going to occur in times of hypotension. So it's going to occur when we have low blood pressure or low blood volume. And how do we detect that? There's two ways in which we can detect that we need to release renin, and that is where we get into when is renin released. So renin will be released when we have a drop in blood pressure or a drop in blood volume, which is going to have different areas in the body which are able to detect that, but specifically we are interested in a specific set of cells found in this area over here called the juxtaglomerular cells, which will detect blood pressure. And we'll get into more detail on that in a minute. So the juxtaglomerular cells can detect blood pressure. Now, the second point in which renin will be released is when we have a drop in sodium levels in the distal convoluted tubules. So recall over here that we have the distal convoluted tubule, and over here we will have the proximal convoluted tubule. So most of our reabsorption occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule, but some of it may occur in the distal convoluted tubule after the filtrate has passed through the loop of Henle. Now, in our distal convoluted tubule, we actually have a specific cell type called the macula densa cells. And the macula densa cells are chemoreceptors which detect the concentration of sodium. And if the sodium levels are low, the macula cells in the distal convoluted tubules will signal to the juxtaglomerular cells to release renin. And we'll get into that more detail in a second. And then the last point in which renin is released is by the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response. Now, going down over here, I mentioned a few times the juxtaglomerular cells. So what does that mean? So juxta means near, and glomerular, we can actually make an educated assumption that that must be near the glomerulus. And if we made that assumption, we would be correct, because the juxtaglomerular cells are located in the afferent arteriole near the glomerulus. And these cells are baroreceptors. Baroreceptors meaning that there is just a specific type of mechanical receptor which will detect blood pressure. And these juxtaglomerular cells found in the walls of the afferent arteriole produce prorenin. So they produce prorenin, and when there is a drop in blood pressure, prorenin will be cleaved to produce renin. And now renin is our active enzyme. We can, if we look at the word prorenin, pro meaning before, so pre-renin, once it cleaves, it becomes renin, which is the active form. Active renin can carry out the reaction of converting angiotensin into angiotensin 1. But what is angiotensin? Angiotensin is a hormone which is produced in the liver. And once it's converted into angiotensin 1, it will then be converted into angiotensin 2 by the angiotensin converting enzyme, also known as ACE. Once we have angiotensin 2, this hormone will go on to bind angiotensin 2 receptors and cause a cascade of reactions within our body to increase our blood pressure. Because remember, this entire process is occurring is because we have low blood pressure or low blood volume, and we're trying to bring it back to normal. And as a result, we get angiotensin 2. But to quickly go back over here, I mentioned, so when is renin released? Well, the essential question we are asking is, when is prorenin going to be converted into renin? When there is a drop in blood pressure. So renin will be released when there is a drop in blood pressure, when there is a drop in sodium. We'll get into that in a second, but the distal convoluted tubule, remember, it has those macula densa cells, and if they detect low sodium, they will tell the juxtaglomerular cells, and the juxtaglomerular cells will release prorenin. Prorenin will be cleaved to renin, and then it will set off that cascade reaction in which we get angiotensin 2. Now, angiotensin 2, what does it do? Well, it'll bind to angiotensin 2 receptors, and what it does is that it stimulates vasoconstriction. Now, vasoconstriction increases blood pressure. Let's talk about how it does that. So we can understand in the body, if we're constricting arterioles and throughout our body, it'll increase the blood pressure because blood has less space to move through. But when I say it stimulates vasoconstriction, I'm actually interested in something more specific, and that is within our renal corpuscle. So in the glomerulus, so it's the network of capillaries, that bundle of capillaries, which are surrounded by the Bowman's capsule, in which we get filtrate, and that filtrate goes on through the rest of the nephron. We have this term, it's called the GFR. So GFR is your glomerular filtration rate. And a normal glomerular filtration rate is about 120 mLs per minute. Now, the glomerular filtration rate is directly proportional to blood flow in the afferent and efferent arteriole. That means that if blood is moving here fast, your GFR will go up. If you're moving here very slowly, your GFR will go down. Now, if angiotensin 2 stimulates vasoconstriction, my afferent and efferent arteriole will constrict. If they constrict, less blood is able to go through the glomerulus. If less blood is going through the glomerulus, your filtration rate will go down. Now, if less blood is moving through here, you're going to have less filtrate, which means that less ions are going to get into the filtrate and go through the nephron. Well, if you already have less ions in your filtrate, and then you send them through your descending loop of Henle and your ascending loop of Henle, and since they're moving slowly, more water will have the ability to exit. And since they're moving slowly back up, more NaCl has the ability to exit. By the time you get to the distal convoluted tubule, you won't have much sodium. And if you don't have much sodium, your distal convoluted tubule will know that, okay, there has been a drop in blood pressure, there is less sodium, I need to tell the juxtaglomerular cells in the afferent arteriole to release prorenin and cleave prorenin to produce renin. So it's all connected in a very complex and exciting way. So going back down over here, we talked about vasoconstriction. Let's talk about sodium reabsorption. So this is quite simple, and this goes hand in hand with aldosterone. So if we have low blood pressure and we want to bring our blood pressure back up, well, one way to do that is to reabsorb ions, because if we have a higher ion concentration in our blood, water will follow, because water will go wherever more ions are to balance out the two concentrations. So if we increase the reabsorption of ions like Na+, water will follow. As a result, we will get more water in our H2O in our blood, and our blood pressure will increase. Now, aldosterone is actually produced by the adrenal cortex. So angiotensin, through a mechanism, will stimulate aldosterone release from the adrenal cortex, and this will promote Na plus and H2O retention. As I mentioned, if sodium is being retained, H2O will automatically follow. And as a result, we get decreased urine because H2O is following that sodium back into our blood, and then decreased urine output. And then angiotensin 2, through other mechanisms, will stimulate thirst. And then we have the release of antidiuretic hormone, or vasopressin. So antidiuretic hormone will be released by your posterior pituitary. So the angiotensin will actually stimulate your hypothalamus, and your hypothalamus will then stimulate your posterior pituitary to release antidiuretic, because you want to retain water to increase your blood pressure. Diuretic means that you release water, antidiuretic means you retain water. So if you're retaining water, you have more water in your blood, higher blood pressure. So all of these events that occurred due to angiotensin 2 will result in an increase in blood volume and an increase in blood pressure, bringing your blood pressure back up from a hypotensive state. Now, this is just to reiterate something I mentioned earlier. Your glomerular filtration rate is directly proportional to the blood flow in the afferent and efferent arterioles. This is really important to understand, because if blood is moving slowly through here, there will be less ions that are able to enter your filtrate. But if blood is moving you have lots of blood moving through here because you're vasodilated, then you will have more ions exiting through your filtrate. And that is essentially the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. It's a mechanism where you have prorenin converted into renin, and then renin itself is the enzyme which catalyzes the reaction from angiotensin 1, which is produced by the liver, to angiotensin 1. And then angiotensin 1 is converted into angiotensin 2, and this is your key hormone, which is responsible for the cascade of reactions, which will bring your hypotensive state to a normal blood pressure.